Somewhere in low Earth orbit, exactly 545 kilometers above the surface of the planet, a satellite is passing over the Middle East approximately 14 times every single day. It was launched from China in June of 2024. It was built by a Chinese commercial company called EarthEye, but it was transferred to a new owner after reaching orbit using a highly controversial business model called in-orbit delivery. This means the satellite was physically launched in China, sent into space, and then the digital keys were handed over to the buyer without any physical hardware ever crossing a terrestrial border. The buyer paid $36.6 million for it. The payment was not made in US dollars. It was made entirely in Chinese Renminbi, and the contract was not signed by Iran's civilian space agency for weather monitoring. It was signed by a brigadier general in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force. From the exact moment the IRGC took control of that satellite in late 2024, its sophisticated targeting systems were pointed at something very specific, not civilian infrastructure, not shipping lanes, American military bases. Yesterday, April the 15th, 2026, the Financial Times published a staggering investigation based on leaked Iranian military documents, time-stamped coordinate lists, orbital analysis, and raw satellite imagery. What those documents show is not speculation. They show exactly which American bases the IRGC directed this satellite to photograph, exactly when those photographs were taken, and exactly how those photographs align with the timing of Iran's missile and drone strikes on those exact same bases during this war. This is not a theory about what China may have vaguely helped Iran do. This is a documented, irrefutable record of what China did help Iran do, assembled from the logs of the satellite itself, confirmed by the timestamps, and cross-referenced with the bloody attacks that followed. Let me give you every verified detail of this operation. The satellite's official name is TE-1B. EarthEye is the company that built it. But EarthEye is not a random private firm. It openly advertises its connections to Chinese universities known to work directly with the People's Liberation Army. Furthermore, the software that operates the satellite and the massive ground infrastructure required to use it are provided by a company called EMPASAT. EMPASAT is based in Beijing. A United States congressional assessment has already linked EMPASAT directly to the People's Liberation Army Aerospace Force through personnel and operational overlap. EMPASAT operates ground stations across Asia, Latin America, and other regions worldwide. This global network of ground stations means the satellite can be securely controlled and its imagery received from multiple geographic locations simultaneously. The Irish Times, in its comprehensive reporting on the Financial Times investigation, noted that the TE-1B is capable of capturing imagery at approximately half-meter resolution, half a meter. At that resolution, you can identify individual fighter aircraft on a runway. You can count transport vehicles in a parking lot. You can track minute changes to base infrastructure between one day and the next. The IRGC's previous best satellite was the Nord 3, which captured imagery at roughly 5 meters resolution. The difference between 5 meters and half a meter is not incremental. It is an order of magnitude leap in targeting precision, and it was provided by a Chinese commercial company with documented ties to the PLA, paid for in renminbi, and acquired through a process deliberately designed to keep the transaction off the radar of Western intelligence agencies and export control frameworks. Now let me give you the specific bases the satellite targeted, because this is where the document moves from concerning to historically significant. The logs show the TE-1B captured detailed images of Prince Sultan Air Base in Saudi Arabia on March the 13th, March the 14th, and March the 15th of 2026. On March the 14th, President Trump confirmed that American aircraft at that base had been hit. The timing between the surveillance photography and the confirmed strike is not ambiguous. The satellite photographed the base. The strike followed. The satellite then photographed it again to assess the damage. This is a complete, closed targeting cycle. Pre-strike reconnaissance, strike timing coordination, and post-strike damage assessment, all executed using a Chinese-built satellite in a war between Iran and the United States. The same satellite methodically monitored Muwafaq Salti Air Base in Jordan. It monitored locations close to the U.S. Navy 5th Fleet Base in Manama, Bahrain. It monitored Erbil International Airport in Iraq. It monitored Camp Buehring in Kuwait. It monitored Ali Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait. It monitored Camp Lemonnier, the vital U.S. military base in Djibouti on the Horn of Africa. It monitored Duqm International Airport in Oman. and it monitored the civilian Gulf infrastructure that Iran was simultaneously threatening, including the Khor Fakkan container port in the United Arab Emirates, a power and desalination plant in the UAE, and the Alba facility in Bahrain, one of the largest aluminum smelters on Earth. Every location a target, every image time-stamped. Every timestamp aligned with an IRGC attack or a direct threat to attack. Nicole Grajewski, a respected expert on Iran, told the Irish Times something that needs to be in every broadcast in the world today. She said, "This satellite is clearly being used for military purposes as it is being run by the IRGC's Aerospace Force and not Iran's civilian space program." She then added this crucial point. Iran really needs this foreign-provided capability during this war, as it allows the IRGC to identify targets ahead of time and check the success of its strikes. A separate intelligence analyst noted that the TE-1B satellite significantly expanded Iran's ability to monitor U.S. military assets. He correctly stated that Iran possesses human intelligence assets around the region surveilling U.S. bases, and that having a satellite of this quality to combine with that human intelligence, plus Russian satellite imagery, is a terrifyingly powerful tool. Then he added the comment that should instantly stop everyone from thinking this problem can simply be bombed away. He said Iran's domestic satellite ground stations, which were hit in 2025 and 2026, can be hit very easily by missiles. But you cannot just hit a Chinese ground station located in another country. That single sentence is the strategic wall that this entire war, the entire bombing campaign, and the entire 47-day operation now runs directly into. American and Israeli jets bravely destroyed Iran's domestic satellite infrastructure. The IRGC's domestic ground stations were struck. The Iranian Space Agency Research Center was turned to ash. The IDF confirmed it targeted space and satellite-related facilities specifically because they were being used to direct fire toward targets across the Middle East. Those strikes successfully degraded Iran's domestic ability to receive and process imagery. But what they could not touch was a ground station network operated by a Chinese company in Beijing, with nodes scattered across Asia and Latin America. Every time U.S. and Israeli planners calculated that they had eliminated Iran's satellite targeting capability, the actual capability they were trying to eliminate was sitting safely in servers in Beijing and control rooms in China, untouchable, legally protected, commercially packaged, and operating 1,500 kilometers beyond the range of any aircraft in the theater. Let me give you the full context of how this satellite connects to every other dimension of Chinese involvement in this war. Because the TE-1B is not an isolated incident. It is one piece of a larger, documented pattern that the Financial Times investigation brings into focus for the first time in one place. Before the war even began, Chinese companies were already supplying Iran with dual-use technology, including navigation systems and satellite components that Iran used to literally build the weapon systems it subsequently fired at American bases. When the war started on February the 28th, Chinese AI companies with ties to the PLA immediately began marketing detailed intelligence on U.S. military movements to anyone who would pay for it. Social media posts tracking carrier group positions, and intelligence breakdowns of how American strike packages were assembling for missions over Tehran. Chinese companies cynically flagged those posts as not violating their terms of service. China's foreign ministry denied involvement. The posts just kept appearing. On April the 6th, China and Russia vetoed a United Nations Security Council resolution aimed at reopening the Strait of Hormuz. Every country on Earth trying to restore the flow of 1/5 of the world's oil supply was blocked by a Chinese veto. Iran called that veto effective in preventing escalation. Then, U.S. intelligence reported China was actively preparing to ship shoulder-fired Manpads anti-aircraft missiles to Iran through third countries, routed to mask their origin. That was the same exact week that satellite imagery confirmed Iran was using the ceasefire to secretly dig out its buried missile launchers. President Trump wrote Xi Jinping a letter asking him not to send weapons. Xi wrote back saying China was not doing it. And then, the Financial Times published its investigation, showing China's TE-1B satellite was already actively being used by the IRGC to target American bases during the war, that the ceasefire was supposed to have paused. China was simultaneously brokering the ceasefire and providing the intelligence infrastructure that made the lethal attacks during the war possible. Here is what this means for the high-stakes negotiations that Pakistan's Army Chief Asim Munir is conducting in Tehran today, carrying a desperate message from Washington, trying to arrange a second round of talks before the ceasefire expires on April the 22nd. the Central American demand at the failed Islamabad talks was nuclear. Vice President Vance said Iran must commit to zero uranium enrichment. Iran refused. That remains the core sticking point. But the satellite story adds a massive dimension to the negotiations that has not yet surfaced publicly in any government statement. The question of Chinese intelligence support is not just a bilateral issue between Washington and Beijing. It is now a documented factor in the war that is supposedly paused. If Iran used Chinese satellite imagery to kill Americans at Prince Sultan Air Base, and that satellite is still in orbit, and China's ground stations are still operational, and no diplomatic agreement addresses the intelligence architecture that made those attacks possible, then any peace deal between the US and Iran is a peace deal that intentionally leaves the targeting infrastructure perfectly intact for the next round of fighting. Secretary Hegseth said at the Pentagon today that Iran is moving its assets around, but cannot rebuild its military power. He said the US is locked and loaded on critical dual-use infrastructure. He proudly stated the US prefers the nice way through a deal, but can do it the hard way. He reminded the world that Iran has 0% of its navy, and the US has 10% of the world's most powerful navy in the region. Every one of those statements perfectly describes the conventional military balance, which genuinely favors the United States by any measurable metric. What none of those confident statements address is the intelligence architecture, the satellite in orbit, the ground stations in Beijing, the Chinese companies with PLA connections processing imagery for the IRGC in real time, the Russian satellite feeds that supplemented Chinese imagery, the deadly combination of three intelligence systems, Iranian human intelligence on the ground, Russian satellite imagery from Moscow, and Chinese precision satellite imagery from Earth-Eye. That triad created a targeting picture that America's conventional military superiority alone could not neutralize. That combination put the crosshairs on Prince Sultan Air Base on March the 13th, 14th, and 15th. And on March the 27th, 12 American service members were wounded there, too seriously, in an Iranian strike. When President Trump was asked directly about the Chinese satellite story at the White House, his response was that he had written Xi a letter asking China not to provide weapons, and Xi wrote back saying China was not doing it. Trump then said doing business with China has never been easy. While describing his personal relationship with Xi as good, he is scheduled to visit China next month, a summit that has already been postponed once because of this war. That summit now carries a historical weight it did not have before the Financial Times published its investigation. Because the question Trump will sit across from Xi to discuss is no longer just trade policy in Taiwan. It is whether China will acknowledge that a satellite it built and launched, and whose ground operations it enabled, was used to kill or wound American soldiers. The ceasefire expires April the 22nd. That is exactly 6 days from now. Pakistan's army chief is in Tehran today. The White House says it feels good about prospects of a deal. Iran's foreign ministry says there is no new proposal from Tehran. The satellite photographed Prince Sultan Air Base 3 days before it was struck. That satellite is still orbiting today. Earth-Eye is still operating today. Empasat's ground stations are still running today. And the Financial Times published the documents that prove all of it. This is the story that changes the frame of this entire war. Not the missiles, not the blockade, not the tunnel entrances being cleared with dump trucks during the ceasefire, the satellite, because everything else Iran did in this war, every strike on every base, every drone hitting every oil refinery, every missile wounding every American soldier was made more precise, more lethal, and more accurate by $36 million of Chinese hardware orbiting 545 kilometers above the Earth. Nobody can bomb it, nobody has addressed it in any negotiation, and it is still up there right now. Subscribe immediately and turn on every notification, because the Asim Munir meetings in Tehran today are the most consequential diplomatic conversations of the last week, and this channel will break down every detail as it emerges. I need you in the comments right now. A. Iran used a Chinese satellite to target American bases, paid for in renminbi, operated by companies with PLA connections, and China is simultaneously claiming neutrality and brokering the ceasefire. Trump is meeting Xi next month. Does this revelation change what Trump can accept at that summit? And does it change what the US can accept in any Iran deal that does not explicitly address the Chinese intelligence architecture? B. The FT investigation was based on leaked Iranian military documents. Someone inside Iran's military intelligence structure intentionally gave these documents to a Western newspaper during an active ceasefire negotiation. Who leaks documents like this at this moment, and what do they actively want to happen as a result? C. Hegseth said today Iran cannot rebuild what was destroyed. The satellite images show dump trucks clearing tunnel entrances. Intelligence confirms China is preparing manpad shipments. The satellite in orbit never stopped working. Is the U.S. actually winning this war, or is it winning the conventional battles while silently losing the intelligence competition? Drop A, B, or C with your full reasoning right now. The best answers will get featured in the next update.